Hello guys, welcome to Phoenix What If. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto became the king of all yokai and got married to Yasaka, DxD, and Tomoe Kamisama kiss. If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Unfamiliar Throne. The piece was loud. That was the only way Naruto could describe it. It was louder than any explosion, any clash of steel, any roar of a tailed beast. It was a cacophony of children's laughter from the academy grounds, the rhythmic thump-thump-thump of a carpenter hammering new homes into shape, and the endless, cheerful chatter of villagers who no longer looked over their shoulders. It was the sound of a world that didn't need saving anymore, and it was deafening. He sat perched atop the fourth Hokage's stone head, his legs dangling over the edge, opposite Ion so familiar it felt like an extension of his own body. The setting sun painted Konoha in strokes of orange and violet, the same color as the sky he'd once fought so desperately under. He should have been happy. He was happy. In a distant, academic sort of way. He was happy for them. For Sakura, running the hospital with an iron will that would make Tsunade proud. For Sai, finding a genuine smile in the ink of his paintings. Even for Sasuke, who was out there, somewhere, finding his own path to atonement. But for himself, there was an emptiness, a hollow ache in his chest where the frantic, desperate drive to be acknowledged, to protect, to fight, had once lived. He was a weapon forged for a war that was over, and the silence of the armory was a kind of madness. He ran a hand through his blonde hair, the wind whipping it across his face. He felt the vast, potent well of chakra within him, a slumbering ocean of power with no storms to churn its surface. It was restless. He was restless. He closed his eyes, focusing on the hum of nature energy that always surrounded him. The chirping of late-day crickets, the rustle of leaves in the Hokage forest, the deep, steady pulse of the earth itself. It was the only thing that truly quieted the noise. In the perfect balance of sage mode, he could almost find a center. Almost. A tremor, sharp and unnatural, cut through his meditation. It wasn't an earthquake. It wasn't a jutsu. It was a dissonant chord in the symphony of the world, a soundless scream that scraped at the edges of reality. Naruto's eyes snapped open. The air in front of him began to shimmer, distorting like a reflection in troubled water. The vibrant colors of the sunset bled, swirling into a vortex of bruised purple and sickly green. It wasn't a portal. It was a tear. The world was being ripped open. He shot to his feet, Kurama's chakra flaring to life beneath his skin, a familiar, comforting inferno. What is that? He sub-vocalized, his senses screaming at him. It's not from this world. Kurama's voice rumbled in his mind, laced with a wariness Naruto hadn't heard in years. It feels old and desperate. Instinct took over. Naruto formed a hand seal, a Rasengan swirling to life in his palm. A miniature star against the deepening twilight. But he had nothing to attack. The tear wasn't an enemy, it was a phenomenon. A deep, gravitational pull emanated from it, tugging not just at his body, but at his very soul. The stones at his feet groaned, dust and pebbles spiraling into the vortex. It's trying to pull me in. He grunted, digging his heels into the monument, chakra flaring to anchor him. It's not just trying, Kurama corrected, a grim finality in his tone. It's succeeding. The ritual, it has a lock on your very existence. The pull intensified 100-fold. It was no longer a force. It was a certainty. Naruto felt his connection to the world, to the very ground beneath his feet, snap like a frayed rope. The Rasengan in his hand dissipated into nothing. His body lifted from the stone head of his father, the village he'd given everything to protect shrinking below him with impossible speed. He heard a distant cry, a single voice shouting his name. But it was swallowed by the sound of tearing fabric, the sound of a universe making way. Then came the fall, or the pull, or the unbeing. It was a nauseating, violent transit through everything and nothing. Colors he had no name for, sounds that were also textures, a feeling of being disassembled and reassembled molecule by molecule. It was agony. It was an eternity compressed into a single, heart-stopping second. He landed with a bone-jarring impact on cold, smooth stone. The air was knocked from his lungs in a harsh gasp. For a moment, he lay there, his mind a whirlwind of vertigo and pain. The phantom sensation of the transit still crawling over his skin. The air here was different. It was heavy, thick with a scent like petrichor after a lightning storm, mixed with the cloying sweetness of incense and something wild. Something ancient and musky, like a forest floor that hadn't seen the sun in 1,000 years. He pushed himself up, his body aching in protest. He was in a vast, cavernous hall. The ceiling was lost in oppressive shadows, supported by colossal pillars of dark, veined stone that seemed to drink the light. The only illumination came from eerie, floating globes of blue and green foxfire, casting long, dancing shadows that made the hall feel alive and breathing. And he was not alone. Arranged in a wide semicircle before him was a gathering of beings that sent a shiver down his spine. A primal recognition of other. They weren't human, not entirely. There were men with the cruel, sharp features of birds of prey, their backs adorned with black feathered wings. Hulking figures with red skin, singular horns, and eyes that smoldered like coals. Women of impossible beauty with the delicate, pointed ears of beasts, and a palpable aura of danger that clung to them like perfume. They were yokai, demons, spirits, the stuff of campfire stories and forgotten legends. And they were all staring at him with a mixture of awe, fear, and raw, undisguised hunger. At the center of the assembly, seated on a slightly raised dais, was a woman who commanded the room without a word. She possessed a stunning, aristocratic beauty, with long, flowing blonde hair and eyes the color of molten gold. But it was the 9 magnificent, fox-like tails that fanned out behind her, each tipped in pure white, that truly held his attention. They swished slowly, hypnotically, a physical manifestation of the immense, controlled power he could feel radiating from her. She wore an elegant, intricate kimono of white and red, and her expression was one of regal composure, though Naruto, a master of reading people, could see the fine lines of strain around her eyes. She was holding a kingdom together with her bare hands. She rose gracefully, her movements fluid and deliberate. The hall, which had been filled with a low, tense murmur, fell silent. "You have come," she said, her voice a smooth, melodic alto that carried effortlessly through the vast space. It was a statement, not a question. The ritual was a success. Naruto finally found his voice, a low growl of confusion and anger. "Where am I? Who are you? What was that?" "You were in the heart of the yokai realm," the woman answered, her golden eyes meeting his without a flinch. "I am Yasaka, acting leader of the Kitsune of Kyoto and regent of this assembly." She made a delicate gesture to the creatures surrounding them. "And that," she added, a hint of desperation coloring her tone, "was our last hope." She explained, her words concise and weighted with urgency. The previous king of all yokai, a being named Nurarihyun, had vanished without a trace decades ago. He was the pillar, the one being whose sheer presence and immense power kept the countless, disparate factions of the yokai from tearing each other apart. In his absence, old rivalries had festered. The Oni clashed with the Tengu, the serpent clans warred with the dragon lords, and the lesser yokai were caught in the crossfire. A full-scale, world-ending civil war was not just likely, it was days away. "Our world stands on a razor's edge," Yasaka continued, her voice tight. "No single faction is strong enough to rule, and none are willing to kneel to another. We required a new pillar. An outsider, bound by none of our ancient feuds, but possessing a power great enough to command the respect of all. Our most ancient divination ritual scoured the infinite dimensions for such a being. They found only one." Her gaze was intense, unwavering. "They found you, Naruto Uzumaki." Naruto stared at her, the pieces clicking into place with a horrifying clang. Summoned, like a familiar, like a tool, the anger that had been simmering in his gut began to boil. "You dragged me from my home," he said, his voice dangerously low. "You ripped me from my world to be your king." The word tasted like ash in his mouth. Before Yasaka could respond, a voice like grinding stones boomed from the side. "A king, this, human." A massive figure stepped forward, parting the other yokai like a ship through water. He was draconic, easily 10 feet tall, with scales the color of a stormy sea and a mane of deep blue hair that flowed down his back. A palpable aura of pressure, like the crushing depths of the ocean, rolled off him. This was a being of immense, ancient power. "You disgrace us, Kitsune," the Dragon Lord snarled, his slit-pupiled eyes fixed on Naruto with utter contempt. Have we fallen so far that we must beg an ape from another realm to lead us? The yokai bow to strength, not to the results of some desperate, cowardly ritual. Yasaka's expression hardened. Ryujin, she warned, her voice dropping an octave. You were party to this decision. Do not forget that. I agreed to summon a power. Ryujin shot back, jabbing a clawed finger in Naruto's direction. Not to hand our throne to the first warm body that fell through the rift. He reeks of human sentiment and weakness. He is no king of mine. I, Ryujin, Dragon King of the Abyssal Trench, say he is unworthy. Quote, a murmur of agreement rippled through a portion of the assembly, the more monstrous and warlike of the yokai nodding in assent. Ryujin's challenge hung in the air, a gauntlet thrown at Naruto's feet. Naruto looked from the proud, furious dragon to the calculating, desperate fox. He saw the fracture lines running through this gathering, the barely contained violence simmering just beneath the surface. They were right. They were on the brink of tearing themselves apart. And they had dragged him into the middle of it. He could refuse. He could try to fight his way out, to find a way home. The thought was tempting. This wasn't his fight. This wasn't his world. But then he looked at the faces in the crowd. He saw the fear in the eyes of the smaller, weaker yokai. He saw the arrogance and pride that reminded him so much of the warring clans of his own world's history. He saw a people on a path to self-destruction. And that was something he could not ignore. It was not in his nature. He took a deep breath, the heavy, ozone-tinged air filling his lungs. He let the anger cool, replaced by a sharp, clear focus. He was a long way from Konoha. You think I'm weak? Naruto asked, his voice cutting through the tension. He directed the question at Ryujin, but his eyes swept across the entire assembly. He took a step forward, his posture relaxed, but very fiber of his being was coiled like a spring. You think because I'm human, I'm unworthy? Ryujin laughed, a harsh, guttural sound. I think you are an insect who has found his way into a nest of dragons. Prove me wrong. Challenge me, or scurry back to whatever hole you crawled out of. A challenge, then, Yasaka said, her voice sharp. She was seizing the opportunity, turning a political crisis into a clear, decisive test. A duel of succession. The winner's claim will be undeniable. That is the old way. Is it not, Ryujin? The Dragon King grinned, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth. It is. I challenge the outsider for the right to the empty throne. Let him face me in the proving ground. If he can survive, I will hear what he has to say. If he cannot, he let the threat hang, his meaning clear. Naruto didn't hesitate. He looked Ryujin dead in the eye, a flicker of his own power, the vast, world-shaking energy of the Nine Tails, leaking into his gaze. The air around him crackled. I accept. The tension in the hall shattered. There was a path forward. A violent, bloody path, but a path nonetheless. Yasaka gave a sharp nod. So be it. She raised her hand, and the very air in the hall seemed to bend. The stone floor dissolved into a swirling mist, the pillars and shadows melting away. They were no longer in the hall, but standing on a vast, floating platform of obsidian under a sky of swirling, chaotic nebula. Other platforms of varying sizes drifted lazily in the void, connected by shimmering bridges of light. It was a pocket dimension, an arena for beings whose power could shatter mountains. Ryujin's form began to shift and swell. His humanoid shape distorted, scales growing larger, his body elongating, his limbs thickening. With a deafening roar that shook the very fabric of the dimension, he transformed. In his place stood a colossal sea dragon, a creature easily the size of Gamabunta, his serpentine body covered in impenetrable-looking azure scales. He coiled in the space between platforms, his massive head level with Naruto, his eyes glowing with ancient malice. Let us see the power of this would-be king. His voice boomed, no longer from a mouth, but from the very air around him. Naruto stood his ground, the wind from the transformation whipping his jacket. He closed his eyes for a fraction of a second, pushing aside the disorientation, the anger. The sheer absurdity of his situation. He focused on the here and now. A giant dragon wanted to kill him. Okay, he could work with that. He dropped into a low fighting stance. He wasn't going to use Kurama's power. Not yet. This wasn't about overwhelming force. This was about a statement. He drew in the energy of this new world. It was different from the nature energy of his home. It was wilder, more chaotic, laced with emotion and instinct. They called it Yuki. He could feel it thrumming in the very stone of the platform, in the strange, nebular sky. He opened his eyes, the pupils now horizontal slits. A ring of orange pigment flaring around them. Sage mode. But it felt different here, hybridized, tinged with the raw chaos of the yokai realm. Ryujin attacked. He didn't move, he simply opened his maw. A torrent of water, compressed to the density of steel, shot towards Naruto. It wasn't just water. It was the crushing pressure of the deepest ocean trench given form, a blast that could pulverize granite. Naruto didn't try to block it. He moved. With a burst of speed that left a flicker of orange in his wake, he dodged to the side, the water cannon screaming past him in oblitera. Ting one of the smaller floating platforms in a cloud of dust and vapor. He was already running, his feet barely touching the ground as he raced across a bridge of light toward the dragon. Ryujin grunted, annoyed by the show of speed. He whipped his tail, a mountain-sized appendage, in a horizontal arc meant to sweep Naruto from his feet and into the void. Naruto leapt, using the top of the tail as a springboard. Flipping high into the air, he formed a familiar seal. Shadow Clone Jutsu. A dozen Narutos exploded into existence around him, each one forming a Rasengan in their palm. They rain down on the dragon's massive back like a shower of angry blue stars. The impacts were explosive, sending shockwaves through the air, but the Rasengans dissipated harmlessly against Ryujin's scales. It was like throwing rocks at a fortress. Insignificant. Ryujin bellowed, a pulse of pure kinetic force erupting from his body, dispersing the clones like smoke. The real Naruto landed on another platform, his mind racing. The scales were too dense. A direct assault was useless. He needed a plan. He needed an opening. He watched Ryujin, his sage senses now fully attuned to the flow of Yuki. He could see it, a shimmering blue aura around the dragon, densest at his core, flowing through him like a river. He could also see how Ryujin gathered it from the environment, pulling it into his mouth before unleashing his attacks. Another water cannon. Naruto dodged again, but this time he was closer. He ran along the side of the blast, the sheer pressure tearing at his clothes. He was using the dragon's own attack as cover. He's adapting, Yasaka murmured from her observation point, her knuckles white where she gripped the railing. Her initial gamble was looking more and more like a stroke of genius. From a shadowed alcove, far from the main assembly, another figure watched with narrowed amethyst eyes. He had long, silver hair that framed a face of ethereal, almost mocking beauty, and T.W. Perfectly white fox ears twitched atop his head. Tomoe, the legendary wandering kitsune, leaned against a pillar, a bored, cynical expression on his face. He'd seen 100 would-be conquerors. Power was common. This human was fast. He was resilient, but he was still just a gnat buzzing around a lion. He hadn't shown anything that mattered. On the battlefield, Naruto was ready. He created 3 clones. They didn't attack. They spread out, running interference, drawing Ryujin's attention, forcing the massive dragon to turn and writhe, trying to track them all at once. Tricks and games. Ryujin roared, unleashing a barrage of smaller, faster water bullets, taking out the clones one by one. But it was the opening Naruto needed. While Ryujin was distracted, the real Naruto was gathering energy. Not just his own chakra, but the wild Yuki of the proving ground. He let his sage mode guide him, pulling the chaotic energy into the spiraling sphere in his hand. The Rasengan grew, its color shifting from pure blue to a churning mix of blue and volatile green, crackling with untamed power. He wasn't just using nature energy, he was weaponizing the very essence of the yokai realm. Ryujin finally vaporized the last clone and turned his massive head back towards the original, a triumphant sneer on his draconic features. Your games are over, outsider. He was met with a yell. You're right. Naruto was already in motion. He'd used the final moments of the clones, distraction to close the distance. He wasn't aiming for the thick scales of the back or head. He was aiming for the underside of the jaw, where the scales were finer, a point he'd identified with his enhanced senses. He slammed the chaotic, Yuki-infused Rasengan into Ryujin's jaw. The impact was utterly different from before. It didn't explode outwards. It drilled. The sound was a high-pitched, grinding shriek as the unstable energy met the ancient, magic-infused scales. A web of brilliant green cracks spread from the point of impact. For the first time, a flicker of shock, of pain, registered in Ryujin's eyes. The Rasengan punched through, not deeply, but enough. Ryujin roared in agony and fury, thrashing his head back, sending Naruto flying. Naruto hit a distant platform hard, skidding to a halt, his arms screaming in protest from the sheer force of the impact. But he had done it. He had drawn blood. He had cracked the unbreakable dragon. The fight was not over. Enraged, Ryujin unleashed his full power. The air grew heavy, charged with immense power. The water vapor in the air began to coalesce around him, forming a swirling vortex of a hurricane. You have sealed your fate. The dragon's voice echoed, distorted by the storm. Naruto pushed himself to his feet, a grim smile on his face. Not yet. He held out his hand, and a shadow clone appeared beside him. A second clone appeared next to that one. They began to work, one shaping the Rasengan, the other infusing it with wind element chakra. The familiar, terrifying shriek of the wind style, Rasenshuriken filled the air. But like the Rasengan before it, it was different here. The chaotic Yuki of the dimension was drawn into it, turning the blades of wind a venomous green. The core a swirling vortex of unstable power. He wasn't just going to break a scale this time. He was going to end this. Ryujin unleashed his ultimate attack, a coloss. Maelstrom of water and wind that tore across the void, a moving apocalypse. Naruto ran straight towards it, the Rasenshuriken screaming in his hand. He threw it. The two attacks met in the center of the arena. For a moment, there was silence. Then, a cataclysm. The Rasenshuriken's microscopic blades detonated, shredding the maelstrom from the inside out. The explosion was a blinding flash of white and green light. A wave of force so powerful it cracked the main platform and sent the watching yokai stumbling back. Through the smoke and dissipating energy, Naruto shot forward like a cannonball. Ryujin was disoriented. His ultimate attack turned against him. Naruto appeared directly before the dragon's massive face, his eyes blazing with power and resolve. He didn't have another Rasenshuriken. He didn't need one. He drew back his fist, channeling every ounce of his sage-enhanced strength into it. He struck Ryujin square on the snout, right on the cracked scales. The sound was like a temple bell, a deep, resonant gong that echoed through the void. It wasn't an attack meant to maim or kill. It was an attack meant to stun, to humiliate, to declare dominance. The colossal dragon shuddered. His eyes, each one the size of a boulder, went wide with disbelief. Then, they rolled back into his head. The massive body went limp, the great head slumping onto the platform with a ground shocky thud that sent tremors through everyone's feet. Defeated. Silence. Utter, profound silence descended on the proving ground. The yokai stared, their expressions a mixture of disbelief and terror. Untouchable dragon king of the abyssal trench, one of the oldest and most powerful of their kind, had been defeated by an outsider in a matter of minutes. Naruto stood over the unconscious dragon's head, his chest heaving. His body battered but unbroken. He could feel every eye in the dimension on him. This was the moment. He could place his foot on Ryujin's head. He could deliver a final, killing blow. He could claim his throne through blood and fear, the way so many would-be kings had before. He did none of those things. He walked to the dragon's massive, bleeding jaw. He reached out and placed his hand gently on the wound. A soft, green chakra flowed from his palm, the bleeding slowing, the pain receding. Then, he turned to the stunned assembly. A king doesn't need to break his subjects to rule them, he said. His voice quiet but carrying with absolute authority in the silence. He looked at the spot where Ryujin's scales had been shattered. He just needs to show them that even the strongest among them can be stronger. Together, he then walked over to the still unconscious dragon lord and held out his hand, palm up, in a gesture of aid that no one could misinterpret. Yasaka watched, her heart pounding in her chest. It wasn't just the power. It was the mercy, the wisdom, the sheer, unadulterated charisma of that final act. She had summoned a weapon. She had gotten a leader. A flicker of something more. Something personal and deeply intriguing, sparked within her. In the shadows, Tomoe's bored expression had vanished. His amethyst eyes were wide, fixed on the scene. The cynical smirk was gone, replaced by a look of stunned, grudging re-evaluation. He had seen power. He had seen mercy. But he had never, in his 500 years, seen them wielded in the same hand at the same moment. This human, this fool, was more than he had appeared. Unseen by any in the yokai realm, the summoning ritual and the subsequent battle had sent a violent shockwave through the dimensional fabric. On the high celestial plane of Takamagahara, a realm of perfect, serene order, a priestess watching over the loom of fate cried out in alarm. A brilliant, chaotic, orange thread, foreign and impossibly potent, had violently woven itself into the tapestry of the lower worlds. An alarm, silent and golden, flashed across the heavens. In a secluded dojo overlooking a sea of clouds, a god sat meditating. He was tall and powerfully built, his presence as sharp and dangerous as a drawn sword. The alarm reached him, a discordant note in the perfect symphony of his world. Takemikazuki, the Shinto god of thunder and swords, opened his eyes. They glowed with cold, divine lightning. An anomaly had appeared, an unacceptable surge of chaotic energy, coalescing around a single point. A threat to the sacred balance. He would watch, and he would wait. Back in the proving ground, Naruto lowered his hand as Ryujin began to stir. He didn't know about the gods, or the cynical fox in the shadows, or even the full depth of the political mire he had just stepped into. All he knew was the feeling that was beginning to settle over him. Yasaka approached, and with a gesture, the platform beneath them solidified. The power of the yokai realm responding to a new master. "The throne is yours," she declared, her voice resonating with a new, genuine respect. "If you will have it." Naruto looked at her, then at the assembled yokai, then at the unconscious dragon at his feet. He took a breath. "I will." As he spoke the words, a searing, golden energy erupted from the obsidian floor. It wasn't chakra. It was something else. A torrent of raw, metaphysical power. The collected will, history, and life force of every yokai in the realm, channeled through the ancient concept of their throne. It surged into him, not as an attack, but as an acceptance, a coronation. He cried out, falling to one knee as a million voices, a million lives, a million conflicting desires flooded his mind. The hopes of the weak, the pride of the strong, the ancient hatreds, the desperate fears, the wild, untamable joy. It was the soul of an entire race, and it was crushing. The weight of it was more immense than any burden he had ever carried. He gritted his teeth, his hands clenched into fists, his own spirit pushing back against the tide, not to dominate it, but to find his place within it, to become its anchor. The golden energy swirled around him, then sank into him, settling. When he looked up, his eyes were no longer just blue. They held a new depth, a chaotic, ancient light swirling within them. He was no longer just Naruto Uzumaki, the hero of Konoha. He was something more, something new. He was their king. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. Whispers in the Foxfire. Naruto awoke to the unsettling sensation of 1,000 whispers skittering across the surface of his mind. It wasn't a sound, but a psychic pressure, a constant, low-grade hum of a million different lives now tethered to his own. He felt the gnawing hunger of a gaki in a forgotten swamp, the territorial pride of a Kameidachi sharpening its claws on a mountaintop, the mischievous glee of a kitsune planning a prank, and the ancient, weary sorrow of a spirit bound to a lonely shrine. The throne was not a crown he wore, it was a consciousness he had been subsumed by. He pushed himself up from a bed made of silks so fine they felt like cool water against his skin. The chamber they had given him was opulent to the point of absurdity. Intricately carved screens of dark wood depicted legendary yokai battles, the air was scented with a calming but alien incense. And a massive window, devoid of glass, opened onto a balcony that overlooked a city bathed in the perpetual twilight of the yokai realm. It was a king's quarter, but it felt like a gilded cage. Kurama, who had been uncharacteristically quiet since the transit, stirred in his mind. It's like trying to listen to a single conversation in the middle of a festival. A festival where everyone is screaming. You'll have to learn to filter it, or it will drive you mad. Easier said than done, Naruto muttered, rubbing his temples. He felt a headache blooming behind his eyes. A phantom ache from the million tiny psychic threads now spooled into his soul. He walked out onto the balcony. The capital city, a sprawling metropolis of gracefully curved rooftops and glowing paper lanterns. Pulsed with a chaotic energy that mirrored the noise in his head. Below, yokai of every imaginable shape and size moved through the streets, their yuki signatures a riot of conflicting colors to his sage-enhanced senses. He was a king. His mind was still struggling to wrap itself around the concept. Yesterday, he was a shinobi with no war to fight. Today, he was the linchpin of a world on the brink of collapse. He had won the duel, he had earned the title, but the victory felt hollow. He hadn't fought for a belief or to protect someone. He had fought because he was challenged. It was a victory of instinct, not purpose. A soft knock came from the door to his chambers. "Enter," he called out, turning from the view. The door slid open silently, and Yasaka entered. She was dressed in a more practical, yet no less elegant, kimono of deep indigo. In her hands, she carried a simple lacquer tray with a steaming teapot and 2 small cups. The 9 golden tails behind her swished gently, a subtle, hypnotic motion that seemed to fill the room with her presence. "I thought you might appreciate something familiar," she said, her voice a calm melody that cut through the psychic static in his head. "It is green tea, a custom I believe we share with your world." "Thanks," Naruto said, genuinely grateful. He gestured to a low table near the balcony. "Please." She set the tray down and poured the tea with a grace that spoke of centuries of practice. The aroma was clean and earthy, a small anchor to a world that felt a lifetime away. She handed him a cup, her fingers brushing his for a fraction of a second. A jolt, like static electricity but warmer, passed between them. Her golden eyes widened almost imperceptibly before her regal composure fell back into place. "You fought well," she began, taking a seat opposite him. "Ryujin is prideful, but he is a being of honor. He will not challenge your authority again. In defeating him, you have secured the loyalty of the Dragon clans and the respect of the other martial factions. And the ones who don't respect a good fight?" Naruto asked, taking a sip of the tea. It was excellent, better than any he'd ever had. "What about them?" Yasaka's lips curved into a faint, knowing smile. "That is why I am here. Your first official duty as king awaits, and it is not a battle." She paused, her expression becoming serious. "The Ri is a dispute between the Karasu Tengu of Mount Kurama and the Kuro Oni clan of the foothills. It is a conflict of spirit and steel." She explained the situation with the same concise clarity she had used in the throne room. The Tengu, an ancient clan of ascetic bird-like yokai, used the high peaks of the mountain for sacred meditation and rituals, drawing on its unique, potent spiritual energy. The Oni, a clan of smiths and warriors, had recently discovered a vein of exceptionally rare, nigh indestructible ore, Hihirokane, the scarlet steel of legends, in the mountain's lower caverns. Their aggressive mining operations were causing tremors, disrupting the delicate flow of energy on the mountain and desecrating what the Tengu considered holy ground. The Tengu demand the Oni cease their operations immediately. The Oni refused to abandon the most valuable ore discovered in a millennium, Yasaka concluded. Ordinarily, this would escalate to bloodshed. The previous king would have either forced one side to submit or ignored it until they weakened each other. How you choose to resolve this will send a powerful message about the kind of king you intend to be. Naruto leaned back, the teacup warm in his hands. This was more familiar territory. Not a fight, but a problem. A clash of needs and beliefs. He looked past Yasaka, at the distant, jagged peak of Mount Kurama visible from his balcony. A dark silhouette against the swirling nebula of the sky. "I'm not going to issue a decree from a throne," he said, his decision already forming. "I'm going to the mountain. I want to talk to them. Both of them, on their own ground." Yasaka's eyebrows rose slightly. It was an unconventional choice. A king descending from his seat of power to mediate a squabble was unusual. It showed a lack of regal distance. Or, perhaps, an abundance of something else. "An admirable sentiment," she said carefully. "But they are proud and stubborn. They will not be easily swayed by words. Then I'll have to use the right ones." Naruto replied, his eyes clear and focused. The whispers in his head seemed to quiet slightly, pushed aside by a familiar sense of purpose. "Have them meet me at the base of the mountain. At sunrise, if there was such a thing as a sunrise in this twilit world." The air on Mount Kurama was electric. It was a palpable force that made the hair on Naruto's arms stand up and his teeth ache. The ancient trees, cedars with trunks as thick as houses, were gnarled and twisted into shapes that defied nature, their roots gripping the rocky soil like desperate claws. The very ground hummed with a raw, untamed power that made the nature energy of his own world feel placid by comparison. He stood in a small clearing where the path began its ascent. Yasaka was beside him, her presence a pool of calm control in the turbulent energy of the mountain. Before them stood two distinct groups. On the right were the Tengu. They were tall and lean, with the sharp, severe faces of birds of prey and magnificent black wings folded neatly on their backs. Their leader, a stern elder with a long, white beard and an impossibly long nose, stood at their head. He wore the simple robe of a mountain ascetic and held a feathered fan. This was Sojobo, one of the oldest and most respected Tengu in existence. His gaze was sharp and critical. On the left were the Oni. They were a stark contrast to the Tengu's ascetic grace. Broad-shouldered and powerfully built, with skin in shades of red and blue, and short, sharp horns jutting from their foreheads. Their leader was a a man with crimson skin and a braided black beard. He wore a simple leather smith's apron over his muscular torso and had a massive kanabo club resting on his shoulder. His name was Kazama, and his posture was one of belligerent defiance. "So, the outsider king comes to pass judgment," Kazama the Oni rumbled, his voice like rocks grinding together. "Speak your piece so we can get back to our work." Sojobo the Tengu shot him a withering glare. "This mountain is a sacred temple, brute. Your work is sacrilege. We ask the king to recognize its sanctity and expel these defilers. This mountain holds the key to forging weapons that could arm our entire kingdom," Kazama retorted, slamming the butt of his club on the ground. The impact shook the clearing. "The strength of the Oni will be the strength of all yokai. Your chanting does nothing to protect our borders." The argument quickly escalated, the two leaders trading insults while their clansmen bristled behind them. Naruto held up a hand. The gesture wasn't forceful, but it carried the authority of his duel with Ryujin, and the clearing fell into a tense silence. "I'm not here to pass judgment," Naruto said, his voice calm and even. "I'm here to understand. Sojobo-san, show me your sacred grounds." He then turned to the Oni. "Kazama-san, show me your mine. I will not make a decision until I have walked the path of both your people." The request was so unexpected that both leaders were momentarily speechless. Yasaka watched Naruto, a flicker of admiration in her golden eyes. He wasn't acting like a king. He was acting like a mediator, a true leader. The ascent was arduous. Sojobo led them up winding, treacherous paths to the upper peaks. Here, the air was thin and vibrated with a pure, piercing energy. Naruto closed his eyes, entering sage mode. He could feel it now, what the Tengu leader meant. The energy of the mountain flowed in serene, harmonious currents, a perfect place for meditation and communion with the world itself. But he could also feel the dissonance. Faint, jarring tremors from deep below, like a discordant drumbeat in a peaceful symphony. "This is our sanctuary," Sojobo said, his voice softer here, filled with reverence. "For generations, we have come here to shed our worldly rage and find clarity. The Ona's blasting shatters our peace. It poisons the very spirit of the mountain." Naruto nodded, in understanding before turning to descend. Kazama led them to the foothills, into a gaping maw in the mountainside that radiated a sweltering heat. The mine was a masterpiece of brutal efficiency. Caverns were supported by thick, rough-hewn beams, and the air was thick with the smell of scorched earth and metal. Deep within, Naruto saw it, a vein of ore that glowed with a soft, internal crimson light, pulsing like a heartbeat. The Hihiirokane, even to his untrained eye, he could tell the metal was extraordinary. "This is the future of the yokai," Kazama said with gruff pride, resting a hand on the glowing vein. "With this, we can forge armor that even a god's blade would struggle to pierce. But it is embedded deep. We have to use powerful explosive charges to break the surrounding rock." He gestured to a series of drilled holes packed with volatile crystals. "The Tengu and their peace can wait. This is about survival." Naruto placed a hand on the cavern wall, closing his eyes again. Letting his sage mode reach deep into the earth. He felt the jarring explosions Kazama spoke of, but he also felt something else. He followed the veins of ore, the structural lines of the mountain, the deep, ancient faults. The Oni were mining with brute force, against the grain of the mountain. But there was another way. He could see it, a map of pressure and release laid out in his mind. He spent the next hour walking the mountain alone, moving between the peaks and the caverns, his mind racing. Yasaka and the two clan leaders watched from the base, their initial impatience turning into a grudging curiosity. Finally, Naruto returned to the clearing. His expression was confident. "You're both right," he began, immediately capturing their full attention. "And you're both wrong." He looked at Kamisama. "You see this mountain as a resource, but you're trying to break it to your will. You're fighting it, and that's why your methods are so disruptive. There are natural fault lines, veins, of softer rock running alongside the Hihiirokane. I've marked them. If your miners follow these lines, using precise, focused charges instead of massive blasts, you can extract the ore with a tenth of the force and a fraction of the tremors. You'll get your metal, and the mountain won't have to scream every time you do." He then turned to Sojobo. "You see the Ona's work as a desecration. But their forges burn with an intense, purified heat. That heat produces a powerful updraft of refined spiritual energy. It's crude, but it's potent. If your mystics were to place resonance crystals along the slopes above their forges, you could capture that rising energy. It would amplify the power of your own rituals 100-fold. You could turn their sacrilege into a source of immense spiritual power." He let his proposal sink in. The clearing was silent, save for the wind whistling through the gnarled trees. He was offering them not a compromise, but symbiosis. A way for them not just to coexist, but to benefit from each other's presence. Kamisama grunted, looking at the dirt map Naruto had scratched out. It was a more efficient, more elegant mining plan than his foreman had ever conceived. Sojobo stroked his beard, his sharp eyes considering the logic of capturing and refining errant energy. It was an unorthodox, yet brilliant, application of spiritual principles. It could work, Sojobo admitted, his voice laced with surprise. "The plan is sound," Kamisama grumbled, clearly impressed despite himself. "It will save us resources. Then you have an accord," Naruto stated simply. He hadn't commanded them. He had given them a solution so logical and beneficial that refusing it would be foolish. He turned to leave, his work done. Yasaka fell into step beside him, a genuine, dazzling eel gracing her features for the first time. "That was," she began, searching for the word. "Inspired. You did not rule, you led. There is a difference." Naruto just shrugged, a bit of his old, goofy grin showing through. "It's just common sense, really. Why break something when you can build it better?" From a high branch of a twisted cedar, hidden in shadow, a pair of amethyst eyes watched him go. Tomoe had seen the entire exchange, and he was utterly disgusted. This wasn't leadership. This was therapy. It was a human solution, reeking of optimism and a naive belief in the inherent goodness of others. Yokai were not good. They were creatures of instinct, of passion, of rage and despair. They needed a firm hand, a king who ruled through fear and overwhelming power, a pillar of absolute authority they could lean on or break themselves against. This boy, this king, was trying to teach them to hold hands. It was pathetic. It was an insult to the very nature of what it meant to be a yokai. And it was a weakness that would get them all killed. Tomoe decided, with a cold, sharp clarity, that this outsider needed a real lesson. A lesson in despair. He needed to be reminded of what lay at the heart of all beings. Human or yokai. Pain and loneliness. The silver-haired kitsune melted into the shadows, his purpose clear. He would test this king's spirit. And he would break it. Later that evening, Naruto found a moment of peace in a quiet, manicured garden near his chambers. A small pond filled with luminous koi reflected the swirling, star-dusted sky. The psychic noise of the throne had receded to a dull roar. And for the first time, he felt like he could breathe. The day's success had been a small, solid victory, a feeling of purpose he hadn't realized how much he'd missed. A flicker of movement, a whisper of displaced air. He wasn't alone. "You're the other one, aren't you?" Naruto said, not turning around. "The other fox. I saw you at the duel." Watching from the shadows, Tomoe stepped out from behind a stone lantern, his movements silent and fluid. He was strikingly beautiful, with a face that could have been carved from marble, but his amethyst eyes held a cold, ancient cynicism. A faint, mocking smile played on his lips. "You have sharp eyes, for a human," Tomoe said, his voice a silken, condescending drawl. "I came to offer my congratulations. Your performance on the mountain was truly touching. You placated them like a mother hen settling her squabbling chicks." Naruto finally turned to face him. "The mountain is at peace. The Oni have their steel, the Tengu have their sanctuary. The kingdom is stronger for it. Isn't that the point?" "The point," Tomoe laughed, a short, sharp sound devoid of humor. "The point of a king is to be a rock, an unshakable force of nature. You showed them reason and compromise. You should have showed them power. You should have made an example of one to terrify the other into submission. That is how you rule beings of chaos. You become the greatest chaos of all." "That's not leadership," Naruto countered, his easygoing demeanor hardening. "That's tyranny. I've had enough of that to last a lifetime." "You know nothing of lifetimes," Tomoe hissed, his smile vanishing. "And you know nothing of us. You think you can fix us with your heartfelt speeches and clever little plans. You, who reek of sunlight and hope. You are a disease in this world of twilight and despair." He took a step closer, his eyes beginning to glow with an eerie, purple light. "A true king must be forged in the coldest depths of the soul. Allow me to give you a proper lesson." Before Naruto could react, the world dissolved. The scent of koi and damp earth vanished, replaced by the smell of dust and loneliness. He was a child again, sitting on the old swing outside the academy, his legs too short to reach the ground. The sun was bright, but it offered no warmth. All around him, he heard them, the whispers he had long since buried. "It's him. Don't look at him, sweetie. He's dangerous. The demon fox, monster." Tomoe's voice echoed around him, a disembodied, mocking narration. "This is their true nature. To hate what they fear. To cast out what is different. You can offer them your heart, and they will only spit on it. Why would our kind be any different?" The scene shifted, the whispers fading into the roar of rushing water. He stood in the valley of the end, rain plastering his hair to his face. Across from him was Sasuke, his eyes cold and empty, a crackling chidori in his hand. The pain of that betrayal, the sting of failure, was as fresh as if it had happened moments ago. "Your precious bonds," Tomoe's voice taunted. "They are nothing but chains you wrap around yourself. And in the end, they always break. The ones you love the most will cut you the deepest." The world dissolved again, into the rain-slicked streets of Amegakure. He saw Jiraiya, impaled and sinking into the depths, a bloody, defiant smile on his face. The gut-wrenching helplessness, the scream that had been trapped in his throat, it all came rushing back. "Even your greatest protectors will abandon you," Tomoe whispered, his voice right beside Naruto's ear. Dripping with cruel satisfaction. "Everyone you rely on will die. Everyone you trust will leave. In the end, you are, and always have been, utterly alone. This is the truth of the world. A king must embrace this truth. So embrace it." Despair. Tomoe expected a scream. He expected a breakdown. He had used this technique, this foxfire illusion of the soul, on powerful yokai lords and driven them to madness. He peeled back the scabs of the soul and poured salt in the wounds until the victim's spirit shattered. But Naruto didn't scream. He stood amidst the phantoms of his own past, his head bowed. A single tear traced a path down his cheek, but he wasn't weeping. When he looked up, his eyes were clear. Pained, yes, but unbroken. A sad, knowing smile took hid his lips as he looked at the illusion of his fallen master. "He never abandoned me," Naruto said, his voice quiet but firm. "He taught me the most important thing I ever learned, to never, ever give up. His spirit is a part of me." He turned to the illusion of Sasuke, the chidori still crackling. "This wasn't the end of our bond. It was a test, and it's a test I'll take 1,000 times if I have to. Because he's my friend." He looked at the whispering villagers, the children who ran from him. They were afraid. They didn't understand. I can't blame them for that. I learned to forgive them a long time ago. He took a deep breath, and a wave of his own golden chakra rolled outwards. It didn't shatter Tomoe's illusion. It added to it. The whispering villagers faded, replaced by the image of Iruka-sensei. a warm smile on his face as he offered Naruto a bowl of Ichiraku ramen. The image of Sasuke at the Valley of the End was joined by a new one. Sasuke, older, standing beside him against Kaguya. The vision of Jiraiya's death was overlaid with the image of the entire village of Konoha, every single person, cheering his name after he defeated pain. Finally, he showed Tomoe the deepest recess of his own mind, the vast open space where he now stood shoulder to shoulder with Kurama, not as jailer and prisoner, but as partners, fists bumped in silent understanding. Naruto's true form, blazing with the gentle, powerful light of his own chakra, overlaid the image of the lonely child on the swing. He looked directly at the source of the illusion, at the hidden Tomoe. "You think my pain is a weakness?" Naruto asked, his voice resonating with a power that shook the very foundations of the psychic prison. "You think my past is something to be buried in despair? You're wrong. All this pain, all this loneliness, it's not the reason I'm weak. It's the reason I'm strong. It's the proof that I can endure anything you throw at me and still find a reason to reach out my hand. It's why I can stand here, as a king, and choose mercy over fear. Can you say the same?" The illusion shattered like glass. Tomoe was thrown backward in the real world, stumbling to a halt, his breath coming in ragged gasps. His amethyst eyes were wide with shock and something akin to fear. He hadn't just seen memories. He had felt them. He had felt the crushing loneliness, and then the overwhelming warmth of connection that followed. He had felt the despair of loss, and the unshakable resolve it had forged. He had looked into the soul of this human and found not a core of darkness, as he had expected, but a star. A furnace of indomitable will that burned brighter because of the darkness it had consumed. It was terrifying. It was magnificent. It was everything he had long ago decided did not exist. Without another word, his pride and cynicism in tatters, Tomoe vanished into the shadows, leaving Naruto alone in the quiet garden. Naruto let out a long, shuddering breath, the adrenaline and emotional strain leaving him drained. The bastard had almost gotten to him. Almost. He sank onto a bench, his head in his hands. "Are you all right?" He looked up. Yasaka was standing at the entrance to the garden. A silken shawl wrapped around her shoulders against the cool night air. Her face was etched with concern. In her hand was a small, elegant bottle of sake and 2 cups. She had clearly been on her way to find him. "I saw Tomoe leave," she said, approaching cautiously. "He can be cruel. He tests everyone and everything. He's thorough. I'll give him that," Naruto said with a weak, wry smile. She sat beside him, the scent of cherry blossoms and night air clinging to her. She poured the sake, the liquid clear as water, and handed him a cup. "He has seen too many would-be kings fail. He believes hope is a poison. It's the only thing I've ever had that's worth a damn," Naruto said, taking a grateful sip of the strong, smooth rice wine. They sat in a comfortable silence for a while. The only sound the gentle clinking of the koi in the pond. "It's hard, isn't it?" Yasaka said quietly, her gaze fixed on the reflection of the nebula in the water. "To stand at the top. To have the lives of so many resting on your shoulders." She sighed, a sound of profound weariness. "Before you arrived, I spent every waking moment in negotiations, in threats, in desperate deal-making, just to keep the factions from erupting. All while trying to make sure my daughter, Kuno, feels safe and loved, and not like a political bargaining chip." Naruto listened, hearing the deep exhaustion beneath her regal tone. It was the same exhaustion he'd heard in the old man Hokage, in Tsunade, in Kakashi. The burden of the hat. Or in this case, the throne. "I get it," he said softly. "After the war, everything was peaceful. Everyone was safe. It's what I fought for my whole life. But I felt useless. Like a kunai locked in a scroll. My purpose was gone." He looked at her, his blue eyes holding a vulnerability he rarely showed. "Here, as crazy as it is, I feel that purpose again. But the loneliness, it's different. It's heavier." Yasaka met his gaze, and in her golden eyes, he saw a perfect, startling understanding. She was the most powerful being he had met in this world, a queen of immense political and mystical power. But in that moment, she was just a fellow leader, a single parent, one who knew the crushing weight of solitude. "You are not alone, Naruto Uzumaki," she said, her voice barely a whisper. A genuine, unguarded smile touched her lips, transforming her face from regally beautiful to simply breathtakingly lovely. Not anymore. The air between them was charged, the space shrinking until it was filled with their shared breath, the warmth of the sake, and a profound, unspoken connection. A sudden flicker of movement, sharp and urgent, broke the spell. Tomoe appeared at the edge of the garden. His earlier shock was gone, replaced by a grim, cold seriousness. He didn't look at Yasaka. His eyes were locked on Naruto. He strode forward and tossed a small, metallic object onto the stone table between them. It clattered beside the sake bottle, a stark, alien thing. It was a piece of armor plating, scorched at the edges, and embossed with an insignia, a stylized cloud pierced by a single, jagged lightning bolt. The object hummed with a faint energy that was the antithesis of the chaotic Yuki of their realm. It was rigid, pure, and unbearably arrogant. A Tengu scout patrol on the western border detected a celestial presence, Tomoe said, his voice flat and devoid of its usual mockery. It was cloaked, but its energy was like a beacon in the twilight. It was fast, but I was faster. His eyes were hard as amethyst chips. It managed to send a final pulse of light towards the heavens before I extinguished it. This was on its chest. Naruto picked up the insignia. The divine energy coiled within it felt like a direct challenge, a declaration of superiority. It was cold and unyielding. "What is this?" Naruto asked, his own mood shifting from introspection to sharp-edged alert. Yasaka leaned forward, her face pale. "Takamagahara," she breathed, her voice tight with dread. "The high celestial plane. The realm of the Amatsukami. The Shinto gods." Tomoe met Naruto's gaze, his expression grim. The time for tests was over. A real threat was here. "It's a warning," Tomoe stated. His voice a low, dangerous rumble. "A sign that they have taken notice of the anomaly. Of the unprecedented surge of power that you represent." He gave a humorless, feral smile. "It started, King of Fools. The heavens are watching you." Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. The God of Thunder's Shadow. The piece of scorched metal sat in the center of the War Council table like a verdict. It was small, insignificant. Yet it radiated an aura of such profound, unyielding order that it made the chaotic, vibrant energy of the yokai capital feel fragile and temporary. Takamagahara. The name hung in the air of the chamber. A name spoken only in hushed legends and cautionary tales. The realm of the gods was no longer a myth. It was a threat. They have never interfered directly in the politics of the yokai realm. Yasaka said, her voice taut. She paced before a massive, enchanted map that showed their realm in shimmering, topographical detail. Not in millennia. They watch, they judge, but they do not act. For them to send a scout, it means they don't like what they see, Tomoe finished, leaning against a pillar with his arms crossed. The lazy cynicism was gone from his posture, replaced by the coiled readiness of a predator. A unified yokai nation under a single, powerful banner is not a part of their celestial plan. We were meant to be a chaotic rabble, too busy killing each other to ever pose a real threat to their order. His amethyst eyes flicked to Naruto. "And you, King of Fools, are the ultimate disruption." Naruto wasn't listening to their analysis. He was staring at the insignia. His sage mode active. He could feel the energy within it, a cold, sharp hum like a perfectly forged sword. It was arrogant. That was the only word for it. The energy fell. Like it believed in its own inherent superiority. It reminded him, uncomfortably, of the Hyuga clan's dogma, but amplified 1,000 times. "They sent one," Naruto said, his voice quiet, drawing both their gazes. "They sent a scout to look. Now they know. So what's next? An ambassador? An army? An ultimatum?" Tomoe answered without hesitation. "They will not deign to negotiate with what they consider to be vermin. They will send an enforcer to demand you dismantle everything you've built. They will demand you abdicate. And if I refuse?" Naruto asked, his eyes narrowing. "Then they will attempt to burn our world to the ground." Yasaka answered, her expression grim. "And unlike Ryujin, they may just have the power to do it." Before Naruto could process the full weight of that statement, the doors to the council chamber burst open. A Kappa, one of the reptilian water-dwelling yokai, stumbled in, his shell cracked and one arm hanging at a limp, unnatural angle. He was gasping, his ebbed feet slapping frantically on the polished floor as he collapsed at the foot of the dais where Naruto stood. "My king," he choked out, water and blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. The western border, the human villages. Naruto was at his side in an instant, a hand glowing with green healing chakra placed gently on the Kappa's cracked shell. "What happened? Talk to me." The Kappa shuddered under the soothing energy. "It's Guro-sama, Guro the Mountain Breaker and his Kuro Oni clan. They've descended from their stronghold. They're not just raiding anymore, they're raising. 3 villages burned in a single night. They're taking supplies, yes, but they're also taking slaves. They say no true yokai would be ruled by an outsider, and they are reminding the world of the Ona's strength." The chamber fell into a deadly silence. The celestial threat was distant, theoretical. This was immediate. This was blood and fire. Yasaka's face was a mask of fury and frustration. "Guro," she spat, "of all the stubborn, prideful fools. He leads one of the 3 great Oni clans. He is an ancient, a behemoth of physical power who believes strength is the only law. He never agreed to the summoning. And he saw your duel with Ryujin as a disgrace to all native-born yokai. He's testing you," Tomoe added, his voice sharp. "This is a rebellion, a challenge to your authority. He raids human villages because he knows your nature. He's heard the stories that have begun to circulate about you. He's forcing you into an impossible choice." Yasaka nodded, continuing the thought. "If you ignore this, you show weakness. You prove Goro's point that you are an ineffective king, and other dissident factions will join him. If you move against him, you risk alienating the Oni clans entirely. Guro is a hero to many of them. To attack him is to attack their pride. You could shatter this fragile coalition before it's even truly formed. It was a perfect political trap. A more crisis designed to break his fledgling kingdom." Naruto listened, his expression hardening. He felt the fear and pain of the dying villagers through the psychic link of the throne, a faint, agonizing echo. He saw the terrified face of the Kappa messenger. He felt the cold, arrogant energy of the god's insignia in his hand. A rebellion here, a divine threat there. His world was being attacked on 2 fronts. He stood up, his decision made. There was no hesitation, no political calculation. There was only the simple, unshakable truth of his own being. "I don't give a damn about the political trap," Naruto said, his voice ringing with cold fury. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. "He is hurting innocent people. He is taking slaves. He is acting like a bully and a monster. That is not the way of my kingdom." He turned to Yasaka. "Give me everything you know about Goro's fortress. Defenses, number of warriors, his personal strength." Then he looked at Tomoe. "I need a fast, elite team. Not an army. This isn't a war, it's an execution, or a conversion. I haven't decided which yet." Tomoe's lips peeled back in a feral grin, his amethyst eyes glowing with a sudden, vicious excitement. The Fool King was done with his therapy sessions. "And who will lead this team?" Naruto's eyes flashed with a dangerous light, the blue depths swirling with the chaotic red of the throne's power. "I'm not sending anyone, I'm delivering the message myself." A profound sense of purpose, clean and sharp as a blade, cut through the noise in his head. He had a mission. He had people to protect. He was no longer just a king. He was a shinobi again. The flight to Goro's domain was a blur of speed and silence. They traveled under the cover of the perpetual twilight, a small, deadly force against the backdrop of a violent alien world. Naruto flew at the head of the formation, propelled by his own chakra, a golden-orange comet. To his right, Yasaka was carried on a platform of condensed, shimmering foxfire. Her 9 tails flowing behind her like a celestial banner. To his left, Tomoe simply ran, his form a white blur that kept pace with them effortlessly, leaping across chasms and up sheer cliffs without breaking stride. Behind them followed a hand-picked unit of 20 Karasu Tengu, their black wings beating a silent, powerful rhythm. Yasaka had provided the intelligence. Goro's fortress, Onigashima, was not a fortress in the traditional sense. It was a hollowed-out mountain, a labyrinth of volcanic tunnels and chambers belching sulfuric smoke, populated by nearly 500 Oni warriors. Each one a match for a dozen lesser yokai. It was considered impregnable. "He will be expecting an army or a siege," Yasaka had said, her voice amplified by a whisper of wind magic as they traveled. He will not be expecting a decapitation strike. I am still curious to see how you plan to decapitate a being who was said to have wrestled a volcano into submission, Tomoe drawled, his voice laced with its familiar mockery. Yet there was an undercurrent of genuine interest. He had seen Naruto's spirit. Now he wanted to see his fury. I want to see how the Fool King handles a real monster. Naruto didn't reply. His focus was absolute. He felt the waves of fear and agony emanating from the lands below, the psychic stains of Goro's rampage. It fueled the cold fire in his gut. This wasn't a political opponent. This was a cancer that needed to be cut out. As they neared the smoking mountain, Yasaka raised a hand. The air is filled with lookout patrols. Goro may be arrogant, but he is not stupid. Then we will be fog, Naruto said. He landed silently on a rocky outcrop overlooking the Oni fortress. The others followed suit. Below them, massive Oni sentries patrolled the entrance to the mountain, their footsteps shaking the ground. Yasaka closed her eyes. Her tails began to glow with a soft, ethereal light. A thick, rolling bank of mist, unnaturally dense and cold, began to pour down the mountainside, swallowing the fortress entrance in a matter of moments. It was her kitsunebi, her foxfire, but woven not as a weapon, but as a shroud of illusion and confusion. Shouts of alarm rose from below, but they were muffled and disoriented. Tomoe, Naruto said, a simple command. The silver-haired kitsune gave a sharp, predatory grin. With pleasure, he vanished. He didn't run. He simply ceased to be there. Seconds later, there were a series of choked-off cries from within the fog. A flicker of white light, a whisper of steel, then silence. The heavy footfalls of the sentries ceased. Tomoe reappeared at Naruto's side, wiping a single drop of purple Oni blood from his cheek. The path is clear. Tengu, secure the perimeter. No one gets in or out, Naruto commanded. Let's go. The three of them plunged into the fog. The entrance to Onigashima was a massive cavern, lit by rivers of flowing lava. The heat was immense, a physical blow. The fortress was on high alert. The sounds of war drums echoing from deep within. They were met by a wave of Oni warriors, a tide of red and blue skin, brandished clubs, and furious war cries. This was not a duel. This was a storm. Yasaka moved like a dancer in the heart of a volcano. She didn't engage directly. Her hands wove intricate patterns in the air, and walls of brilliant blue foxfire erupted from the ground, separating platoons of Oni, herding them into kill zones, and shielding Naruto from flanking attacks. Her tails were a whirlwind of golden energy, lashing out like whips to disarm and incapacitate. She was the strategist, the battlefield controller, turning the Ona's numbers against them. Tomoe was a ghost, a whisper of death. He moved through the battle like he was untouchable, a blur of white fur and amethyst light. He never fought the Ona's strength. He flowed around it, a precise strike to a knee joint to cripple, a flash of his claws across the back of a neck to paralyze, a focused blast of High's own foxfire to blind a charging berserker. He was a white-hot scalpel, disabling Goro's lieutenants and strongest warriors before they could even bring their strength to bear, his movements a symphony of deadly, elegant grace. And Naruto was the heart of the storm. He was a force of nature. He didn't dodge. He smashed through their lines. He met a swing from a club the size of a tree trunk with a punch that shattered it into splinters. He grabbed a charging Oni by his horns and threw him into a dozen of his brethren, sending them flying like bowling pins. He was a whirlwind of orange and black, his clones appearing and disappearing in flashes of smoke, their Rasengans hammering the Oni lines, creating chaos and openings. He felt Yasaka's fire protecting his flank. He saw the blur of Tomoe creating a path for him. They moved as one, a three-headed dragon of strategy, speed, and overwhelming power. They carved a path through hundreds of Oni, a straight, undeniable line toward the heart of the mountain, the throne room of Goro himself. They burst into a colossal, magma-lit cavern. At its center, on a throne carved from a single, massive piece of obsidian, sat Goro the Mountain Breaker. He was even larger than the rumors suggested. A true behemoth, easily 15 feet tall, his skin the color of cooling lava, with a massive, braided black beard and two colossal, jagged horns curling from his brow. In his hand, he held a kanabo club that looked less like a weapon and more like a pillar ripped from a temple. The air around him was so heavy with his physical presence that it felt like gravity had doubled. He rose from his throne, a low growl rumbling in his chest. So, the little whelp has come to my mountain. I am Guro, and you are a trespasser. Naruto walked forward, Yasaka and Tomoe fanning out to either side of him. The floor was littered with bones, both human and yokai. The sight sent a fresh wave of cold rage through him. Your rampage is over, Guro, Naruto said, his voice echoing in the vast chamber. Guro laughed, a sound like an avalanche. Is it? I am an Oni. I am the strength of the earth. I take what I want. That is the old way. That is the true way. You speak of unity and peace. Those are the words of the weak. He hefted his kanabo. Show me your strength, king, or be crushed beneath my heel. Naruto cracked his neck. The whispers of the throne surged within him. No longer a confusing noise, but a river of power he could draw from. He closed his eyes, and the golden-orange glow of his sage mode flared to life. But it was different now. It said with the power of the yokai he now commanded. A chaotic, blood-red aura, the very essence of the throne's Yuki, wrapped around his sage mode like a shroud. Golden light and red chaos. Order and entropy. A walking contradiction. His sovereign sage mode. He opened his eyes, and they glowed with a terrifying intensity. All right then, Naruto said, a grin stretching his face, a grin that was all Kurama. Let's play. He vanished. He reappeared right in front of Guro, his fist drawn back. Guro, for all his size, was deceptively fast. He brought his massive kanabo around in a horizontal arc that could have leveled a building. Naruto didn't dodge. He met the club with his open palm. The impact was a sonic boom. A shockwave erupted from the point of contact, cracking the obsidian floor and sending dust and debris flying. The kanabo, a legendary weapon said to be unbreakable, stopped dead. Goro's eyes went wide with disbelief. My turn, Naruto grunted. He pushed. The momentum of Goro's own swing was turned against him. The massive Oni stumbled back a step, off balance for the first time in centuries. Naruto was already moving, his clones bursting into existence around Guro, not to attack, but to act as anchors. They latched onto his limbs, his horns, their combined sage-enhanced strength momentarily restricting the behemoth's movement. Insolent gnat, Guro roared, thrashing and throwing off the clones. But it was the opening the real Naruto needed. He leapt high into the air above Guro, a familiar, terrifying shriek filling the cavern as he formed it. A wind style, Rasenshuriken. But this was not the technique that had defeated Ryujin. This one was larger, more violent, the wind blades a sickly, toxic green from the infusion of raw, malevolent Yuki, the core-tailed beast bomb, a sphere of pure, concentrated destruction. Guro looked up, and for the first time, a flicker of genuine fear appeared on his face. He raised his kanabo with both hands to block. Too slow, Naruto yelled, and threw. He didn't aim for Guro. He aimed for the club. The tailed beast bomb Rasenshuriken struck the legendary kanabo mid-shaft. The explosion was contained for a fraction of a second, and then it detonated. The sound was not a boom, it was a scream of tortured metal. The kanabo, Goro's symbol of power, his pride, shattered into 1,000 incandescent pieces. Guro stared at the smoking handle in his hands, his mind unable to process what had just happened. In that moment of shock, Naruto appeared before him, his hand pressed against Goro's chest. In his palm, a small, perfectly controlled Rasengan spun silently. No, not a Rasengan. It was a miniature-tailed beast bomb, no larger than his fist, humming with enough power to vaporize the entire mountain. Checkmate. You talk about the old ways, Naruto said, his voice dangerously quiet in the sudden silence. The old way would be for me to kill you right now. To mount your head on a spike and let your clan rot. Is that the kind of kingdom you want? Guro was trembling, not from fear, but from sheer, impotent rage. He was defeated, utterly. I offer you a different path, Naruto continued, the tailed beast bomb still humming against Goro's chest. Your strength is undeniable, your smiths are legendary, I am building a kingdom that will face gods. I have no use for a rebellious thug who preys on the weak. But I have great use for a loyal general who can forge the weapons of a new era and lead the unbreakable frontline of my army. I am offering you true glory, Guro. Glory beyond mere rating. Serve a kingdom that will make the name Oni feared in the heavens themselves, or be the last of your line to ever see the dawn. He pulled his hand back, the tailed beast bomb dissipating into nothing. He stood before the disarmed, defeated Oni chieftain and simply waited. Goro looked at the shattered remains of his weapon, then at the unwavering, powerful being before him. He saw the Fox Queen, her eyes blazing with strategic fire. And the white phantom of a kitsune, whose deadly grace had dismantled his command structure. He saw a king who had the power to obliterate him but chose to offer him a future instead. The old way was strength. And this was the greatest strength he had ever witnessed. With a groan that seemed to shake the very foundations of the mountain, the great Oni chieftain, Goro the Mountain Breaker, fell to one knee. He bowed his head. My club is broken, Goro rumbled, his voice thick with humility. My life is yours. I will serve. The stream was cold, washing away the blood and grime of battle. The water flowed down from the high peaks of Goro's now pacified mountain, clean and pure. The adrenaline of the fight had faded, leaving behind a deep, satisfying weariness. Naruto splashed the icy water on his face, the chaotic red of his sovereign sage mode having receded, leaving him feeling drained but clear-headed. Tomoe was downstream, methodically cleaning his claws, his movements as precise and economical as they were in battle. Yasaka was a few feet away, her back to Naruto, undoing the intricate ties of her battle kimono to wash the grime from her neck and shoulders. Her long, blonde hair was matted with sweat and dust. A comfortable, charged silence settled over the three of them. They had moved as one, thought as one. The victory was not just Naruto's, it was theirs. The bond between them had been forged from a shared glance in a garden into something solid and real in the heart of a volcano. Naruto walked over to her, his footsteps quiet on the mossy stones. Without a word, he took a handful of her heavy, tangled hair and began to gently wash it in the flowing water, his fingers carefully working out the knots. Yasaka stiffened for a moment, surprised by the gesture, then relaxed into his touch, a soft sigh escaping her lips. She leaned her head back slightly, her trust in him absolute. He could feel the tension draining from her shoulders. Tomoe watched them from the corner of his eye. He said nothing. The mocking smirk was absent from his face. What he had witnessed today, it was more than just power. It was a synergy he had never seen before. A perfect fusion of strategy, lethality, and indomitable will. He felt an unfamiliar, unsettling emotion stirring in his chest. It wasn't respect, not yet. It was belonging, a feeling he had long since forgotten. The moment was intimate, peaceful, earned, and then the world went silent. The gentle babble of the stream, the whisper of the wind, the chirping of unseen creatures, it all vanished. An oppressive pressure descended upon the mountain, a weight so immense it felt like the sky itself was falling. It was a pressure that dwarfed Goro's, dwarfed Ryujin's. It was the pressure of a fundamental law of the universe making its presence known. Naruto, Yasaka, and Tomoe straightened up instantly, their brief moment of peace shattered. They looked up. The twilit sky above the mountain peak began to darken. The swirling nebula blotted out by an encroaching, unnatural storm. But there was no wind, no rain. Just a suffocating, silent blackness. Then, a single, brilliant pillar of golden lightning, thicker than any tree, silent as the void, struck the peak of the mountain. The light was blinding. When it faded, a figure stood there. He was tall, with a warrior's build, clad in ancient, immaculate white and blue armor. He held no weapon, yet his entire being screamed of swords. His face was stern and impassive, radiating an aura of divine, unshakable arrogance. It was the same feeling Naruto had gotten from the insignia, amplified a millionfold. Tomoe let out a low, guttural hiss, his ears flat against his head. Takemikazuki, he breathed, the name a curse. The god's eyes, glowing with a cold, internal lightning, scanned the scene below. He saw the pacified Oni fortress, the kneeling Goro now directing his clan to tend to the wounded. He saw the Kitsune Queen, her power a brilliant flame of chaos. He saw the legendary White Fox, a phantom of pure, untamed Yuki. And he saw the outsider, the anomaly, the orange-clad human who reeked of a power that had no place in this world. He had not come to fight. He had come to deliver a verdict. He casually raised a hand and flicked his wrist. A full power blast of concentrated foxfire, a purple-white beam of soul bu. RNING energy that Tomoe had unleashed without a thought, a blast that could incinerate a lesser yokai to ash, flew toward the god. Takemikazuki didn't even look at it. He simply let it wash over him, dissipating against his divine aura like a raindrop on a hot stone. The god's gaze settled on Naruto, pinning him in place. The sheer pressure of his divine aura was a physical force, bringing the WLY sworn Oni and even the elite Tengu to their knees. Only Naruto, Yasaka, and Tomoe remained standing, and it was a struggle. "You were an anomaly," Takemikazuki said. His voice was not loud, but it was absolute. It resonated not in their ears, but directly in their minds, a voice of pure, undeniable authority. A cancer grown in the heart of chaos. This unification is an affront to the natural order. It is an aberration that will not be permitted to stand. He looked at Naruto with the cold, detached disdain of a god looking at an insect. "I am Takemikazuki no Makoto, Sword of the Heavens, Enforcer of the Celestial Will. I bring you the one and only decree of the Amatsukami." He paused, letting the weight of his pronouncement crush them. "Abdicate this mockery of a throne. Disband this unnatural coalition. Return to the hole from which you crawled." His eyes glowed with barely contained lightning. "Do this, and your insignificant lives may be spared. Refuse, and I will personally dismantle this kingdom, stone by stone. And erase every creature that follows you from the tapestry of existence." The threat was no longer a piece of metal on a table. It was here, it was real, and it had a name. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. Oaths Under the Crimson Moon. The god's ultimatum was a poison. It seeped into the cracks of Naruto's fledgling kingdom, chilling the fiery loyalty he had just forged in the heart of Goro's mountain. The divine pressure had vanished as quickly as Takemikazuki had appeared, but a psychic residue remained, a lingering dread that was far more corrosive than any physical threat. Fear. It was a scent Naruto knew well, and it was now thick in the air of his capital. The council chamber, once a place of tense but forward-moving energy, was now a pit of simmering panic. Yokai lords who had praised his strength against Goro now spoke in hushed, terrified tones of the futility of fighting the heavens. Ryujin, the Dragon King, his pride still smarting but his pragmatism sharp, was the loudest voice of dissent. "This is not a battle we can win," he boomed, his voice echoing off the stone pillars. "Takemikazuki is not some hot-headed Oni chieftain. He is a primary god of war. His blade, the Futsunomitama, is said to have pacified the very land of this world in the age of myth. To defy him is to court annihilation. So we are to bend the knee. We are scatter like rats because a god in the clouds is displeased." Goro had countered, his newfound loyalty a roaring fire. "The king showed us that strength respects strength. We must show the heavens our teeth." The debate had raged for hours, splitting the fragile coalition down the middle. The martial factions, like Goro's Oni and the wolf-like Okami clans, bristled for a fight, their warrior pride stung. The more ancient and mystical factions, the Serpent Lords, the courtly Kitsune, even the Tengu, were paralyzed by a deep, instinctual fear of divine retribution. They remembered the old tales. They knew what happened when gods were angered. Naruto had listened, his face an impassive mask, the weight of a million terrified whispers pressing in on him through the throne. He saw his kingdom, not yet a week old, threatening to tear itself apart, not by his hand, but by the mere shadow of a god. He needed to restore their faith, not just in him, but in their own right to exist. But first, he needed to find his own. He'd ended the council with a simple, quiet declaration: "I will not be ruled by fear. We will prepare." He offered no plan, no rousing speech. He just gave them a single point of certainty in a sea of terror. It was enough to stop the infighting, for now. As the lords departed, muttering amongst themselves, only Yasaka and Tomoe remained. The toll of the last few days was visible on them. Yasaka's movements had lost some of their fluid grace, her shoulders tight with tension. Tomoe's usual mask of cynical detachment was gone, replaced by a grim, focused intensity. "They are terrified," Yasaka stated, the words heavy with exhaustion. "And I cannot blame them. I am terrified." "Fear is a tool," Tomoe countered, his gaze fixed on Naruto. "It can sharpen the senses or it can break the will. Theirs is about to break. What is your plan, King?" Another heartfelt speech. The mockery was there, but it lacked its usual bite. It was a genuine question, masked by habit. Naruto looked at them, his two pillars. His sharpest strategist and his deadliest warrior. He saw the strain in their eyes, the unspoken question. Can we win this? My plan, Naruto said, is to get away from all this. He gestured to the grand, oppressive chamber. We can't think here. We can't prepare. We're drowning in their fear. He met Yasaka's gaze. You once mentioned a place. A neutral ground. A place of sanctuary. A flicker of understanding dawned in Yasaka's golden eyes. The Fushimi Inari Shrine, she breathed. It exists, apart, a pocket dimension, a haven maintained by a pact with its patron deity. It is the most sacred ground of our Kitsune people. Inari Okami, Tomoe added, a complex emotion in his voice, something close to reverence. The god of foxes, rice, and prosperity. One of the few Amatsukami who has always held a fondness for the yokai. He is different from the likes of Takemikazuki. But his sanctuary is not a fortress. We don't need a fortress, Naruto said, his gaze sweeping between them. We need clarity. We need to understand what we're up against, and we need to figure out how to fight it. And I need to get stronger. My power. This sovereign sage mode, it's unstable. It's raw power without control. I need to master it. He looked at them, his partners, the two beings in this entire alien universe he could truly count on. We do this together, or we don't do it at all. Passing through the Torii gate into the Inari Shrine was like stepping from a raging storm into a soundproof room. The oppressive weight of the yokai realm's fear vanished, replaced by a profound, humming peace. The shrine was a world unto itself, an endless path of thousands of vibrant, crimson torii gates that snaked up a mountain blanketed in a forest of impossible green. The sky here was a perpetual, deep indigo, dominated by a full moon that glowed with a soft, crimson light. The air was clean and smelled of cedar, earth, and the faint, comforting scent of brewing tea. There were no priests, no attendants. The shrine was maintained by its own gentle, ambient magic and the occasional flicker of a small, silver fox darting through the undergrowth. It was a place of absolute tranquility. For the first day, they did nothing. Naruto slept, a deep, dreamless sleep free from the whispers of the throne for the first time since his arrival. Yasaka spent hours simply sitting by a clear, bubbling stream, her 9 tails relaxed on the mossy ground behind her, the lines of stress slowly melting from her face. Tomoe vanished into the upper reaches of the mountain, finding a solitude that seemed to mend the frayed edges of his ancient spirit. They were healing, shedding the accumulated weight of the crown, the rebellion, and the divine ultimatum. On the second day, the work began. Their training ground was a small, flat clearing near the mountain's peak, surrounded by ancient, silent trees. Divine power is not like Yuki or your chakra, Tomoe explained, circling Naruto like a wolf. He was the teacher now, the centuries of his existence providing a knowledge that no one else possessed. Yuki is chaotic, emotional, drawn from the land and the soul. Divine power is conceptual, it is the physical manifestation of a belief, an idea. Takemikazuki doesn't just wield lightning, he is the concept of a thunderous, decisive strike. He doesn't just have a sharp sword. He is the idea of a blade that pacifies and subdues. Naruto listened, absorbing the information. So how do you fight a concept? You don't, Tomoe stated bluntly. You cannot defeat the concept of a sword with a better sword. You must find a flaw in the wielder or introduce a conflicting concept. His authority, his very power, stems from his role as an enforcer of celestial law. He is absolute only so long as he acts within that mandate. While Tomoe instructed Naruto in the esoteric nature of their enemy, Yasaka became their spymaster. From the sanctuary of the shrine, she sent out her most trusted kitsune agents, silver-furred messengers who could slip through the dimensions unseen. They were not to fight or engage, but simply to gather whispers. They spread out across the human world, the yokai realm, and even ventured to the shadowed borders of other pantheons, seeking any information, any legend, any weakness related to Takemikazuki. She sat for hours under a crimson-leafed maple, a low table before her, receiving the tiny, magically sealed scrolls her messengers brought back, her sharp mind assembling a mosaic of intelligence. Naruto's own training was a brutal exercise in self-mastery. His sovereign sage mode was a war within himself. The serene, balanced energy of the natural world fought against the wild, emotional, chaotic Yuki of the yokai throne. When he activated it, it was like holding a lightning bolt in one hand and a river of lava in the other. The power was immense, but it tore at him, threatening to rip him apart. "You are trying to force them together," Tomoe criticized. Watching as Naruto struggled, beads of sweat pouring down his face as golden and red energy warred around him. "You are trying to make the river flow uphill. The sage energy seeks balance. The Yuki seeks expression. They are not enemies. They are two halves of a whole. You're whole. Stop trying to command them. Find the point where they meet." "And where is that?" Naruto grunted, his muscles straining. "In you," Tomoe snapped. "In your will. What is the one thing that both the sage and the sovereign within you agree on? What is your core? Find it. Be it." Naruto grit his teeth, the red and gold energies flaring violently. He was thinking of Konoha, of his dream to be Hokage, of the peace he'd fought for. But that was his past. It wasn't his present. He looked over at Yasaka, diligently working through her scrolls, the fate of her people on her shoulders. He saw Tomoe, the eternal cynic, pushing him, training him, investing in a future he'd long since given up on. He thought of the terrified whispers of the yokai, a people who had been taught to fear and fight, who had never known true unity. His core. It wasn't about being acknowledged anymore. It wasn't about a title. It was simpler. "I will protect my family. I will build them a home where they don't have to be afraid." It was a declaration so simple, so pure, that it cut through the internal conflict like a razor. His will was not a command. It was a purpose. The warring energies didn't merge. They aligned. The golden sage energy became the foundation, the unshakable bedrock of his conviction. The chaotic red Yuki became the walls, the roof, the protective barrier fueled by his fierce, passionate desire to defend what was his. The violent storm around him coalesced. The red and gold stopped fighting and began to flow together in a perfect, harmonious spiral. The aura around him solidified, no longer wild and explosive, but calm, contained, and humming with a power that was terrifying in its stillness. He opened his eyes. They shone with a steady, unified light. He looked at a nearby cherry blossom tree, ancient and withered, its branches bare and lifeless. It had been dead for centuries, a silent monument to the passage of time. He reached out his hand, and a gentle, spiraling stream of gold and red energy flowed from his palm, enveloping the dead tree. It wasn't an act of force. It was an act of creation. New bark flowed over the withered wood. Green buds erupted from the dead branches. In a matter of seconds, the ancient tree burst into a riot of vibrant pink blossoms. A testament to a life that had been rekindled. It was an act of pure, unadulterated life force, a perfect fusion of natural harmony and chaotic vitality. Yasaka looked up from her scrolls, her lips parted in awe. Tomoe stood frozen, his cynical mask completely gone, his amethyst eyes wide with stunned disbelief. He had told Naruto to find his core. He hadn't expected him to find the very essence of creation itself. In that moment, Tomoe saw not a fool king, but a god in the making. The days bled into one another in the timeless sanctuary. They trained, they planned, they worked. But in the quiet moments, in the evenings under the crimson moon, something else grew. They would gather by the stream, sharing a simple meal of rice and grilled fish brought by the silent silver foxes. The titles of king and consorts, of leader and advisors, fell away. They were just Naruto, Yasaka, and Tomoe. One night, the conversation turned personal, the quiet of the shrine inviting a vulnerability that the palace never could. "My husband, my former husband," Yasaka began, her gaze distant as she stared into the glowing red moon reflected in the water. "He was a great Kitsune lord. Powerful, proud. He believed our people should seclude themselves, that we should have nothing to do with the other yokai. He saw strength in isolation. When he died fighting in one of the endless territorial skirmishes, I was left to lead. And I saw the truth. Isolation wasn't strength. It was a slow death. That is why I sanctioned the ritual. I would rather gamble on an unknown outsider than watch my people slowly fade away." She looked at Naruto, a soft, sad smile on her face. "I never imagined the gamble would bring someone like you." Naruto felt a pang of empathy for her, the lonely burden she had carried for so long. Later, it was Tomoe who spoke, a rare moment of unguarded honesty. I had a master, once, he said, his voice a low murmur. A land god, a weak, foolish, but kind man. I served him, protected him, and I watched him grow old and die, while I remained. I have watched everyone I have ever known turn to dust. He picked up a stone and skipped it across the stream, the ripples disturbing the moon's reflection. I decided then that attachment was a fool's game, a path to inevitable pain. It is better to stand alone. No one can leave you if you never let them in. He didn't look at them. But Naruto knew the words were for them. He was explaining himself, not as a cynical foil, but as a man who had been deeply, irreparably hurt. Naruto listened, and his heart ached for the centuries of loneliness the proud Kitsune had endured. I used to think being alone was my destiny, Naruto said, his own voice quiet. I was the outcast, the monster. The only way I survived was by screaming to the world that I existed. By forcing them to look at me. He looked at his hands. The bonds I made, with Iruka-sensei, with Kakashi, with my team, they weren't chains. They were my armor. They were the reason I could get back up when I was knocked down. Being alone isn't strength, Tomoe. It's just being alone. He looked from Yasaka's weary but hopeful face to Tomoe's guarded, pained one. These two people, a queen who feared for her people's future and a warrior who was afraid to embrace his own, had become his closest confidants. They had seen his past, his pain, and had not turned away. They had seen his power and had not cowered. They were his partners. They were his family. Under the light of the crimson moon, surrounded by the silent, ancient trees, the unspoken feeling that had been growing between them finally bloomed. It wasn't a sudden passion. It was a slow, inevitable sunrise. A quiet recognition that what they had been missing, they had found in each other. Naruto reached out, taking one of Yasaka's hands. She took it without hesitation, her fingers lacing with his. He then reached out his other hand to Tomoe. The silver-haired Kitsune stared at the offered hand for a long moment. A war of centuries of self-imposed solitude fighting against a desperate, burgeoning hope. Then, slowly, hesitantly, he placed his hand in Naruto's. His touch was cool, but not cold. I don't know what the future holds, Naruto said, his voice thick with emotion as he looked between the two of them. I don't know if we can beat a god. But I know I don't want to face it without you. Either of you. Yasaka's golden eyes shimmered with unshed tears. Nor I, she whispered. Tomoe said nothing, but he squeezed Naruto's hand, a silent, profound admission. Yasaka smiled, a genuine, radiant expression of pure joy. She reached into a small pouch at her waist and produced 3 small, simple, unadorned red clay sake cups. It was the custom of the Kitsune, the oldest and most sacred of oaths. A marriage was not a thing of priests and ceremonies, it was a promise made between souls. She filled the 3 cups from a small flask of shrine-blessed sake. She held one out to Naruto, and one to Tomoe, keeping the third for herself. They looked at each other, a silent question, a silent answer. They were 3 different beings, from different worlds, with different pasts. A human hero, a yokai queen, a cynical immortal. It was impossible, it was insane, and it was the only thing that felt right. They raised their cups. They didn't speak vows. They didn't need to. Their promise was in their intertwined hands. In the shared understanding in their eyes. They drank. It wasn't a political marriage. It wasn't a strategic alliance. It was an oath. A pact sworn under a crimson moon, binding their souls, their powers, and their destinies together as one. They were no longer just a king and his advisors. They were a family. As they sat there, their hands still linked, a silver fox with intelligent, knowing eyes appeared from the shadows. It carried a single, rolled-up scroll tied with a silver cord. It padded silently up to Yasaka and dropped the scroll at her feet before vanishing back into the forest. This was not one of her own messengers. The scroll pulsed with a faint, gentle, but undeniably divine energy. Yasaka unrolled it. Her eyes widened as she read the elegant, flowing script. It's from Inari Okami, she breathed, her voice filled with disbelief. A message from the god of this shrine. She looked up at Naruto, her eyes blazing with a new, fierce hope. It's intelligence. A gift. Inari does not approve of Takemikazuki's warmongering. He sees it as a threat to the prosperity of both the human and yokai worlds, which are more linked than the other gods care to admit. She read from the scroll. Takemikazuki's power is absolute, but his authority is not. His mandate is to punish transgressions against celestial law, not to act on personal pride. The Futsunomitama, his divine sword, is the symbol of that mandate. He must be seen by the heavens to be acting as a righteous enforcer. If he is goaded into acting like a belligerent tyrant, if he can be made to look like he is fighting out of fury rather than duty, his authority will be questioned. The other gods will not intervene on behalf of a hothead who has overstepped his bounds. Naruto, Yasaka, and Tomoe looked at each other. A plan, daring and incredibly dangerous, began to form in their three united minds. They weren't going to fight a god's power. They were going to attack his pride. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. War drums at the gates of twilight. The return from the Inari shrine was a silent declaration. When Naruto, Yasaka, and Tomoe stepped back through the Torii gate into the main council chamber. The oppressive atmosphere of fear was still there, but it could no longer touch them. They moved with a newfound synergy, a quiet confidence that was more potent than any speech. Naruto's presence, now infused with the perfected harmony of his sovereign sage mode, was an anchor of calm authority in the turbulent sea of yokai politics. The whispers of the throne were no longer a chaotic din. They were a chorus he could conduct. He did not call a council. He did not ask for a vote. He stood before the great enchanted map, the divine insignia of Takemikazuki held loosely in his hand. And he issued his first true command as king. We fight. The words were quiet, but they resonated through the palace like a thunderclap. He turned to face the assembled lords, his eyes glowing with a calm, unified light of gold and red. I will not promise you an easy victory, he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the vast hall. I will not promise you that there will be no loss. The enemy we face is a god, and he brings with him the might of the heavens. He expects us to cower. He expects us to break. He expects us to be what we have always been, a scattered, squaw, bling collection of clans who will turn on each other at the first sign of pressure. He paused, his gaze sweeping over them, meeting the eyes of Ryujin, of Guro, of Sojobo, of every clan leader present. But we are not that anymore. Look around you. Oni and Tengu, dragons and Kitsune, all stand in this hall as one. We are a nation forged in desperation, tempered in battle, and now unit. Ed by a single purpose, the right to our own existence. He held up the celestial insignia. This is the symbol of their belief that we are lesser. That our chaos is a sin and our freedom is a flaw. They want to put us in a cage they call order. I say our chaos is our strength. Our freedom is our birthright. His voice rose, no longer quiet, but filled with a fiery, infectious conviction that was pure Naruto Uzumaki. So let the heavens watch. Let them send their thunder and their righteous fury. We will meet them at our gates. We will show them the power of a united yokai realm. I will not ask you to fight for me. I ask you to stand with me. To fight with me. To show the gods what happens when they try to put a chain on a storm. He crushed the divine insignia in his fist, the metal growing and crumpling into a worthless ball. For our homes. For our freedom. For our kingdom. A moment of stunned silence, and then a roar. It was Guro who bellowed first, a deafening war cry that shook the very foundations of the palace. It was answered by the Oni, then the dragons, then the wolves, and then, a wave of defiant sound swept through the entire assembly. The fear was not gone, but it had been burned away by the white-hot fire of a king's resolve and replaced with a furious, unified pride. Ryujin, the Dragon King, looked at Naruto, a new, profound respect in his stormy eyes. This was a king worth following into the jaws of hell itself. The capital city, a place of lanterns and shadows, transformed into a fortress. War drums, silent for centuries, began to beat a deep, heart-aching rhythm that pulsed through the realm. The sky above the city darkened, not with clouds, but with thousands of Karasu Tengu taking up watch positions on the rooftops. Goro's Oni, their forges roaring day and night, began constructing massive barricades of obsidian and scarlet steel, their hammers ringing in a frantic, purposeful chorus. Ryujin and his serpent clan allies descended into the city's deep water channels. preparing to turn the very canals into defensive moats of crushing pressure. Yasaka became the nerve center of the entire operation. From the highest tower of the palace, she directed the chaos. Her kitsune agents her eyes and ears. She wove illusions to mask their true numbers, created phantom fortifications to draw the enemy's first strike, and organized the civilian yokai into support roles, healers, messengers, supply runners. Her strategic genius was on full display, turning a chaotic city into a complex, layered death trap. Tomoe, meanwhile, became Naruto's spear. He handpicked a small, elite unit of the fastest, deadliest yokai, Kamedachi weasel demons who moved like the wind, Nekomata cat spirits who could walk on shadows, and a handful of his own stoic, silent kitsune brethren. They were the assassins, the saboteurs, the force that would strike from the shadows while the main army held the line. Naruto himself was the beacon. He walked the lines, his presence a constant reassurance to the terrified but determined warriors. He oversaw the fortifications, offering strategic advice that Goro's builders grudgingly admitted was brilliant. He sparred with Ryujin's best warriors. His movements fluid and overwhelming, demonstrating a power that gave them hope. He was everywhere, the unshakable center of the storm he had unleashed. He found a moment's peace on the palace wall, looking out at his mobilized kingdom. Yasaka came to stand beside him, her hand finding his. A moment later, Tomoe appeared on his other side, a silent, comforting presence. They didn't speak. They just stood there, a king and his two consorts, their souls bound, their purpose aligned, watching the war drums beat at the gates of their twilight world. They did not have to wait long. A stillness fell over the city. The war drums faltered, then stopped. A collective gasp rose from a million throats. On the horizon, the swirling, chaotic nebula of the yokai sky was being torn asunder. A perfect, golden light spread across it, burning away the twilight and revealing a sky of pure, celestial blue. And from that light, they descended. An army, not of flesh and blood, but of concepts and light. Beings of pure divine energy, shaped into the forms of warriors in shining golden armor, their faces blank and impassive. They were flanked by creatures of myth, Qilin and celestial lions. Their bodies not of fur and muscle, but of solidified light and holy fire. They moved in perfect, silent unison, a vision of heavenly order so absolute it was terrifying. And at their head, descending on a chariot of crackling, golden lightning, was Takemikazuki. He had donned his full battle regalia, his armor gleaming, his presence so immense it warped the air around him. At his hip was the Futsunomitama, his divine sword, still sheathed, but its very existence was a palpable threat. He stopped his army a league from the city walls, an overwhelming force of pure, divine might arrayed against the chaotic, cobbled together defenses of the yokai. So, the vermin have chosen defiance. Takemikazuki's voice boomed across the plains, a sound of rolling thunder and divine judgment. A foolish pride. You will be made an example. This realm will be purified by righteous lightning, and your memory will be a cautionary tale for 1,000 generations. He raised a hand, and 1,000 golden lances of pure light materialized in the hands of his celestial soldiers. Naruto stood on the highest point of the city wall, his orange jacket a stark banner of defiance against the divine light. Yokai, he roared, his voice amplified by chakra, a raw, powerful sound that met the god's pronouncement head-on. This is our home, and we do not yield. With a deafening cry that was a mixture of terror and fury. The yokai answered him, a million voices rising as one. The battle for the yokai realm had begun. The first wave was a volley of 1,000 celestial lances. They streaked across the sky, silent and impossibly fast. Now, Yasaka commanded. From the canals and moats, Ryujin and the dragon lords rose up. They didn't attack. They unleashed their power skyward. A colossal dome of water, compressed to the density of steel, formed over the city. It was not a solid barrier, but a churning, semi-liquid vortex, a technique designed not to block, but to refract and diffuse. The lances of light plunged into the water dome. Most were bent off course, exploding harmlessly in the plains outside the city. Hundreds more were slowed, their energy dispersed, hitting the city walls with the force of a battering ram instead of a divine missile, a blow the Oni-forged barricades could withstand. Forward, Takemikazuki commanded, his voice cold and unimpressed. The divine army surged forward, a silent, shining tide of death. "Guro!" Naruto yelled. The great Oni chieftain stood on the front line, a new, even larger kanabo of pure scarlet steel in his hands. "Oni, hold the line, for the king!" he bellowed, and his warriors answered with a roar, their bodies glowing with a furious red energy. They were the wall. They met the silent, perfect charge of the divine soldiers with a messy, chaotic, and unbelievably brutal counter-charge. The battle on the ground was a clash of two philosophies. The divine soldiers moved with perfect coordination, their strikes precise, their formations unbreakable. The Oni fought with pure, unrestrained fury. They swung their clubs with wild abandon, they roared, they bled, they grabbed their enemies and tore them apart with their bare hands. They were chaos against order. And for every Oni that fell, they took 3 divine soldiers with them, their bodies exploding in a shower of golden light. From the rooftops, the Tengu unleashed a storm of razor-sharp wind blades, disrupting the celestial formations from above. The Kappa ambushed soldiers in the canals, dragging them underwater. The Nekomata flickered through the shadows, their claws tearing at the enemy's unprotected flanks. It was a beautiful, bloody chaos. And in the heart of it all were the 3 sovereigns. Yasaka did not fight, she conducted. Her 9 tails blaze, like golden suns as she stood atop the palace, her mind a nexus of battlefield intelligence. Ryujin, shift the vortex east. They're concentrating their archers. Sojobo, target the Kilin cavalry. Ire charge is about to break the western flank. Guro, hold, reinforcements are coming. Her commands were swift, precise, turning the yokai's chaotic energy into a focused weapon. Tomoe was death incarnate. He and his elite unit moved through the battle like a phantom menace. They never engaged the main force. They appeared from the shadows, their strikes impossibly fast, and eliminated the commanders of the celestial units. A flash of white fur, and a divine centurion would collapse, a gaping hole where its core of light should be. Tomoe himself flowed through the enemy ranks, his claws laced with his own corrosive yuki, a poison to the divine being's pure energy. He was dismantling Takemikazuki's command structure from the inside out, turning the perfect army into a confused mob. And Naruto was the tide. He was everywhere. He appeared on the front lines, a sovereign sage mode Rasenshuriken obliterating an entire phalanx of celestial soldiers who were about to overwhelm Guro. He appeared on the western wall, a massive Rasengan in each hand, driving back a charge of celestial lions. He created 1,000 clones, not just to fight, but to reinforce crumbling walls, rescue the wounded, and relay Yasaka's commands. He was a beacon of impossible power and unwavering hope, his presence turning a desperate defense into a defiant stand. During a brief lull, as the divine army regrouped, a celestial soldier broke through a weak point in the line, its golden spear aimed directly at a weary Naruto's back. Before he could even turn, a wall of blue foxfire erupted in front of the soldier, incinerating it. To his other side, a blur of white, and another soldier that had flanked him collapsed silently, Tomoe's claws retracting from its back. Naruto, Yasaka, and Tomoe stood back too. Back for a fleeting second in the heart of the raging battle. A shared glance, a grim nod. They were the unshakable center of the yokai army, their bond a palpable force on the battlefield. Takemikazuki watched from his chariot, his impassive face finally showing a flicker of irritation. His perfect army was being bogged down, dismantled by chaos and trickery. The casualties were far higher than he had anticipated. This was not the clean, righteous purification he had envisioned. It was a messy, undignified brawl. And at the center of it all was the orange-clad anomaly. He had seen enough. This needed to end. With a motion so fast it was almost invisible, he drew the Futsunomidama. The moment the blade left its sheath, the very nature of the battle changed. A wave of pure, conceptual power washed over the battlefield. The idea of order, of pacification, of divine judgment. The chaotic energy of the yokai faltered. Their movements became sluggish, their fury dampened, their courage turning to dread. The blade didn't just radiate light, it radiated authority. Enough of these games, Takemikazuki said, his voice now devoid of any theatrics, leaving only cold, hard lethality. He descended from his chariot, landing softly on the battlefield. The ground around him cracked, not from his weight, but from the sheer pressure of his presence. He pointed his sword at Naruto. You, anomaly. Your existence ends now. He moved. It wasn't a run or a charge. He simply ceased to be where he was and appeared in front of Naruto, his blade swinging in a perfect, inescapable arc. Naruto's senses, honed by countless battles and perfected by Sage Mode, screamed. He brought up a chakra-infused kunai to block. The Futsunomitama cut through it as if it were paper. It sliced through Naruto's defenses, through his flak jacket, and carved a deep, searing gash across his chest. Naruto cried out, stumbling back, the wound not just bleeding, but burning with a cold, golden fire that his healing factor struggled to contain. It was a conceptual wound, a wound that declared he should be injured. You cannot fight a concept, Tomoe's words echoed in his mind. Takemikazuki advanced, his face a mask of divine contempt. You are merely a collection of stolen power and misplaced sentiment. I am a fundamental law of this universe. You cannot win. Naruto gritted his teeth, the pain immense. He looked past Takemikazuki, at the watching eyes of the divine army, at the heavens themselves. This was the moment, the plan. He didn't retreat. He didn't defend. He charged. You talk too much. Naruto roared, his body flaring with the full, unrestrained power of his sovereign Sage Mode. He wasn't aiming to win. He was aiming to provoke. He engaged the god in a furious, wild, and utterly unpredictable melee. Clones erupted everywhere, attacking from all angles. Rasengans of all sizes and shapes hammered at the god's defenses. He threw dirt in the god's eyes. He used transformation jutsu to appear as Yasaka or Tomoe, forcing the god to hesitate for a split second. It was messy. It was cheap. It was utterly dishonorable. And it was working. Takemikazuki, the god of perfect swordsmanship and righteous battle, was being forced into a chaotic, ugly street fight. He deflected every blow, parried every strike, his technique flawless, but a vein began to throb in his temple. Cease this mockery, he snarled, his divine composure beginning to crack. Fight me with honor. You want honor, after threatening to murder my entire kingdom. Naruto yelled back, a clone latching onto the god's e.g. while the real Naruto aimed a Rasengan at his back. Takemikazuki roared in pure frustration, a pulse of divine lightning erupting from his body, vaporizing all the clones. His eyes, once cold and impassive, now blazed with raw, personal fury. The plan was working. He was no longer a righteous enforcer. He was an angry god, swatting at a persistent insect. I will tear you limb from limb. Takemikazuki screamed, his voice losing its divine resonance and becoming a mortal snarl of rage. He lunged forward, his perfect form abandoned for a furious, powerful strike. This was what Naruto was waiting for. He knew he couldn't dodge it. He knew he couldn't block it. So he met it. He deliberately allowed the Futsunomitama to impale him, guiding the blade with his own hands through his right shoulder, a grievous, agonizing wound. The pain was blinding, a cold fire that threatened to extinguish his very soul. But it achieved his goal. It brought the enraged god into point-blank range. Got you, Naruto gasped, a bloody grin on his face. Takemikazuki's eyes widened in shock, realizing his mistake too late. He was too close. With his one good arm, Naruto thrust his hand forward. It wasn't a Rasengan. It wasn't a tailed beast bomb. It was a simple, brutal, sage-enhanced punch, fueled by the raw, chaotic Yuki of the throne and all the pain and fury of a cornered king. He poured everything into it. He didn't aim for the god's head or heart. He aimed for the Futsunomitama's blade, right where it entered his own body. The punch connected. The sound was not an explosion. It was a scream, the sound of a fundamental concept being violated. Naruto's fist, an embodiment of chaotic will and untamed life, struck the blade that was the embodiment of absolute order. A web of brilliant, webbing cracks of pure golden light spread across the divine blade. It didn't shatter, but it was scarred, marred. Its perfection was broken. And with that crack, Takemikazuki's connection to his absolute authority wavered. The divine pressure over the battlefield lessened. The yokai felt their strength returning, their courage rekindled. The watching heavens saw not a righteous god punishing a transgressor, but an enraged deity being wounded and outsmarted by a mortal. Takemikazuki stumbled back, clutching his sword, his face a mask of utter disbelief and humiliation. He, a god, had been wounded, not his body, but his very concept, his pride. He had failed. And he had failed in front of everyone. Naruto collapsed to one knee, the divine sword still impaled through his shoulder, blood pouring from the wound. But he was smiling. They had done it. They had cracked the god's invincibility. Chapter 5 End.